Welcome to another episode of Crosstalk. My name is Kevin Tocci, and I will be your host for the next 30 minutes. Now, as you have come to expect from this particular program, we try to talk about what's going on in the community, whether it's an upcoming event, it could be an election, it could be a new store opening down the street, it could be something like our conversation today, something that's kind of gripping our Commonwealth at this particular time. And, the drug epidemic it's very real, and I think it's something that's important to have conversation about whenever we can, and bringing in experts and people who deal with it, and even just having a friendly conversation aside from the drug epidemic. We have joining us today is none other than our friend down at the Plymouth County Sheriff's Department, the sheriff himself, Joe McDonald.
Kevin, thank you for having me.
Welcome. The sheriff is here on a regular basis talking with us about a variety of things. I think last time you were here, we were talking about some of the programs that your department has. I thought it was important to have you in here to talk about a couple of things. One particular thing that you have been a part of, and that is since Governor Charlie Baker got sworn in January, he realized what was going on with the drug issue and decided to put together a little bit of a working group to look at the opioid drug issue. And you were one of the members who got to be on that panel.
I was honored to be asked to be on that panel, and I was honored further to be one of only two elected officials on that panel, Mayor Carpenter from Brockton,
yep,
and myself, two Plymouth County guys. And we participated for several months on that panel. We were meeting in Boston. We went on the road. We did listening tours. And I learned a tremendous amount, as I'm sure the mayor would say as well, but we all did. There were members of the medical community that were there. There were people from the pain community, people who suffer from chronic pain. There were people there from the courts, from probation. There were people from private industry. It was really a tremendous cross-section of the Commonwealth, and many, many people from other groups that came and spoke, both at the meetings and the listening sessions.
I have to ask, were the listening sessions that you did around the Commonwealth, were they the only activities that the working group did, or were there other things outside of that?
No, there were many, many things that we did. There were 4 of the listening sessions, and the reason that we did that was to get out to people who may not have been able to make the trip into Boston to present before the group. We met at the Department of Health and Human Services at Ashburton Place in Boston. But we had a Boston listening tour, we had a Worcester listening tour, a Greenfield listening tour, and the one that we had down in Plymouth.
Right. And
all of those were scheduled for, I believe, 2 hours, and they all went between 4 and 5 hours in length because the response was so big. And we didn't want to turn anybody away, but we heard from police, we heard from people in recovery themselves, we heard from victims of crime that had been committed against them by people under the influence of drugs or to get money for drugs. We heard from family members. We heard from really anybody that you can think of, and what great information they provided to us and some great ideas. So we had those listening tours, and we also had numerous meetings up there at the Office of Health and Human Services under the direction, and I might add tremendous direction, of Mary Lou Sutters, who is the Secretary of Health and Human Services. What a great job she did chairing and moderating really everything that we did.
So once you're out there, you're meeting with people, you're having organizations bringing you information, what was the charge from there? What were you to do with all this information that you gathered?
Sure, yeah, well, it was a huge charge, and we were aware of that. We set those goals. Yeah, the enormity of it, right? We had set those goals prior really to getting started, except for having met each other. But before we started the listening tours or coming together, we knew that we wanted to make certain findings from hearing from those factual findings. And then factual findings are a great thing. You can have statistics, you can have expert testimony, and you can put these things together and they're factual. But facts by themselves really weren't going to do us much good, except maybe educate us as to what was going on, which is good. But you need to take it one step further. And what they decided, or what we decided we were going to do, was come up with an action plan. And the beautiful part of it is that we were able to take those facts, distill those facts, talk about them amongst ourselves, and then they're actually up on a website at the Executive Office of Health and Human Services, and you can see that we have an action plan. Yes,
if you could hold yours up so folks can see.
Absolutely.
Right there.
Yeah, and you can see that now these are available to anyone who's interested. I printed these copies for us, but if you look on the bottom here, it's www.mass.gov/stopaddiction. So mass.gov/stopaddiction. And you can see when you look at the action plan to address the opioid problem that we started at the beginning, which I thought was great. We talked about the scope of the problem. Mm-hmm. We talked about, first off, being prevention initiatives.
Yeah, that's huge.
And what could we do? Because that's, one of the most important things. The old adage that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. I think that is true. And if you visit the website, you can see that we could do a whole hour show on just prevention.
Just
right?
on prevention.
So I'm just going to hit the highlights here and refer the viewers, if they're of a mind, and I hope that they are, check these things out online.
While you're watching this right now, they could do it.
Sure, if that's what they wanted to do, absolutely. But we talked about prevention initiatives and things about that, like public awareness, things like educational programs in schools. The old DARE program that some of our towns are still using, and there's controversy with reference to whether or not that's effective. I'm a firm believer that no matter what anyone wants to say, education, information is a good thing. So what we're trying to do is get those programs, and I was surprised that the experts that talked before us were saying that it is a good thing to have educational programs in the schools, but even at an earlier age. So we're talking as they're older in elementary school and before they're getting into middle school to get these things.
I agree with you, and if you don't mind me interjecting real quick, is I've had a chance to speak with Nancy Liedberg, and I'm sure you know who she is, from the city of Brockton. She runs a particular program that tries to inform parents about what they can do. And I've talked with her a number of times on the radio and had discussions, and you're right, I've heard middle school, that's right around the... But I'm starting to hear that maybe even prior to that, and you just mentioned elementary school, that we may need to dial it back even further to really get the saturation of the message out about the dangers of doing drugs.
Right. And I think that's so true, and that is, if you look at our recommendations, that's part of it as well. The other thing that was surprising to me, now I was aware of the what they call the PMP, or the Prescription Monitoring Program. What I was unaware of is how low the compliance rates were with that. And here we've had that law for several years, and what the PMP, what the Prescription Monitoring Program does, is when a doctor prescribes opiates, they're supposed to make reports of those things to HHS, to Health and Human Services. And a lot of the doctors are balking at that, or I should, hopefully in the past. It takes time, office staff, it's a problem. But that really is important, that we beef up that, and that's one of the things that they're going to talk about, the prescriber practices. And the other thing that was surprising to me, and I think some of the doctors as well, was the limited amount of time that they spend on these issues in medical school.
Wow.
It was like an hour or two on these issues, and they're huge issues. And part of it is, now I know that none of the physicians that I have ever met have ever sought to do harm of any kind. But I think what they were unaware of is that although these drugs, these opiates, could work wonders as far as pain relief, they weren't really being schooled in the power of those drugs to cause addiction. The power they knew to alleviate pain, but the addictive qualities of these drugs. And now there is a very heightened awareness, I'd say, amongst the prescribers, and I think that's going to bolster the PMP and their practices. So when you have someone going for dental surgery or something and having a wisdom tooth out and then getting a whole bottle full of Percocets or Vicodins or something like that, gee, I don't know if I'm going to need those. We're getting away from that, and I think that's a great thing. The prevention initiatives was something that we spent a good deal of time on, and we came up with, I think, some really good solutions. And I think the best solution of all, because it was education, for the students, for the parents, and most importantly, for the medical community. And hopefully going forward, we're going to see the medical schools, we don't want to dictate what their curriculum must be, but we want them to be cognizant and thinking about these issues going forward.
Going around and touring the Commonwealth, did you hear that Did you hear from people who realize that this isn't a certain culture or just the kid gone bad, that this is something that
Right.
it could be a student athlete who gets injured and gets addicted to did you hear people who their eyes were opening up eventually to this?
We did, and not just at the listening tours, but as I'm going around and talking to people, I'm seeing more and more and more of that. And I think that's a good thing. One of the things that we talked about as a group was the stigma that is involved in having a relative and someone dealing with these issues, and somebody that you love, because it's a difficult thing for anybody to face, let alone something that, now people are going to ridicule you and your family. What we're trying to do is to get away from the idea that this is something that only bad or weak people are going to suffer from, because it can happen to anybody. And you correctly point out student athletes. And, time was, when I was a kid and, so-and-so was a drug addict and, living under a bridge or was homeless.
Pothead or something.
Yeah, exactly. And to us, there was a certain amount of free will involved. And they decided they don't want to be anything. People understand now that isn't the case, because you've got situations where student athletes at the top of their classes and the top of their games are getting injured and getting addicted to these opiate drugs.
Right.
And the opiate drugs, when the prescriptions run out, they still have that addiction that they're dealing with. And what are they doing to alleviate that craving? They're turning more and more to the street drugs. Right. And that's, the worst of all is the heroin.
It's basically graduating. Well, I mean, if they can't get the drugs from their doctor, I know I've heard of people purchasing, and that, an Oxycontin or oxycodone pill can cost $30, $50, $80, and then when they can't afford that, then you're correct, they're turning to the $3 or the $5 or the $10 packet of heroin that could start out as snorting, and eventually to get the quicker high. And if I don't think folks understand the graduation from one high to wanting to get higher and higher and higher, or because you go from snorting, you're not getting high as quick, but when you're putting it right into the blood system.
Right, and the effect, the neurological effects are amplified and instantaneous. You said a lot of people don't think about that graduation. You think about graduation as moving up and moving up and moving up. I think an easier way to think about this is moving down and moving down and moving down, but the slope is so steep. You correctly point out the street value on things like the Oxycontin. It's $1 a milligram. So if you have an 80 milligram pill, that's $80 on the street, or better. And then you've got a whole bottle full of those pills. That's some big dollars. You also have the situation where the people that are getting involved in these things, and a lot of them, as we've talked about, are good people from good families who would never commit crimes were they in their right mind. And what they're doing, we're seeing that they're stealing from their families.
Yep.
They're emptying their bank accounts.
You don't realize it until it's too late.
Right, yeah, and virtually everyone is affected by this.
Everybody.
If the people in the viewing audience are not affected by this directly, they know somebody who is.
Right.
And that is when you know that something really, really must be done.
And you kind of helped me segue to another part in this action plan, and that is treatment. And I think treatment is key. Education is to prevent any future addiction, but those who are currently affected right now, treatment, I think, is key.
Treatment is absolutely key. And before we get to the treatment part, we also had some intervention initiatives. We spoke about those. Yeah. Things like the prescription monitoring program, the data collection that we're going to be getting more in real time now, so that we're going to know what parts of the Commonwealth are having problems and what are the issues that are being dealt with there, and how can we best address those. But also, you talk about the treatment initiatives, and I think that was also a place where people need to really be educated, and hopefully, once they're educated, they're empowered to know that we do need to make a lot of changes. A lot of these changes are going to, necessarily be legislative. And the good news is that our legislators, everyone that I've spoken to, is foursquare behind, helping us alleviate these problems. But a lot of the problems that people are facing are insurance issues. Sure. What is insurance going to pay for? And right now, the unfortunate thing is the insurance is not set up to deal with these types of issues in a very effective way. Usually the coverage is very limited, and it's also not just limited in the scope, but in the situation. So you may have someone who finishes a treatment program, is ready to go to the next step but can't get into that next step. So they're left hanging, and God forbid they end up getting back into the drugs, and by the time they come back around, because they had to wait for the second step, they need the first step again, and the insurance won't cover it for another period of time. So there's a lot of insurance issues that we're going to have to deal with. Yeah, and part of the insurance part of this is, once we change our way of thinking about the stigma of this, we need to start thinking of it as a disease, because it is, and treat it. And the doctors, this is something that I learned from the doctors, they will view this, and I think there's a certain amount of wisdom to this, as an illness similar to any other chronic type of an illness, like diabetes or any of those other illnesses. So we don't necessarily stigmatize those diseases, and I think hopefully culturally we'll come around to saying we understand that the disease model fits this scenario and we should apply it as well, not just in our own minds, but in our insurance as well.
Let's talk a little bit as far as treatment. Do you feel, did the working group feel that enough is being done? I mean, because you think of Boston, you think about Massachusetts. Folks will come from all over the world to come to Boston for treatment for any medical illness or problem. Was that something that weighed into this when it came down to treatment, or was it just a matter of having enough beds and enough facilities to be able to help these people?
It's a great question, and the answer is yes. But I think we here in Boston, in general, and the medical community in particular, is rightfully very, very proud of the tradition that we have of really being the best medical care anywhere in the world. Carrying that pride and perhaps that burden in some sense, we were faced with the situation that we are woefully inadequate with reference to our ability to treat people dealing with substance abuse problems. So I think the consensus, and you'll see when we talk about this, is we do, or if you look at the suggestions that were made, we do need to bolster our ability to, not just through insurance, but a lot of folks, if they're lucky, they're ready for treatment, but sometimes those folks are not ready for treatment. Those are some of the issues that we talked about, the Chapter 123, Section 35 petitions, where people can be involuntarily committed. Much talk was centered around that.
Sure.
How do the people avail themselves of the court? You have a loved one who is heavily into the drugs. They deny it. It's just a matter of time before they injure somebody or kill themselves. You go to the court, you petition, and you have them sent. So we're looking to put some, number one, to increase the capacity to have that.
Sure.
Number two, not to do it in a correctional setting. You don't want to send those people necessarily to jail for that. But you want to have the ability to do that, sending them to a secure place that isn't jail, but also, I say secure with the emphasis on that, something that they can't walk in the front door and walk out the side door 2 or 3 hours later, only to turn up in front of a judge 2 weeks or a week and a half later who says, I think I committed that person last week, and you did, Judge, but they're back. So we talked about that as well. That's something that needs to be bolstered.
And if I can kind of jump on, you and I have had a prior conversation. You talk about Section 35. My first hearing of a Section 35 is through a gentleman who you mentioned earlier on in the program, Brockton Bill Carpenter, who served on this working group, is somebody who has direct knowledge when it comes to dealing with the situation of addiction, and hearing him talk with folks and kind of telling a story about when you have to commit your own child and they're sitting there begging and pleading, don't do this to me, but deep down inside, while it's one thing that's killing you as a parent to do this, that maybe you're saving their life for another day, because if they were free out on the streets, they might use, and you never know, it just takes that one bad use for them to overdose and ultimately die.
Right. So many, and it's so true. That's one of the things that if you spend any time in the courts, and as you know, I was 9 years an assistant DA, and I saw the parents agonizing through those issues, through those situations and scenarios, and your heart goes out to them. And the best thing I think that we can let them know is that there are a lot more people who are sympathetic and understand that although it kills you to have to do that to your own child, that sometimes it's really what you have to do to save their lives. I'll tell you a quick anecdote. I walk around the county and do a lot of things in my own neighborhood and other neighborhoods, and I'm sometimes approached. People will come up and they'll say, "Oh, hey, I know you. You're the sheriff." And yes, oh, thank you. Yeah, pretty visible. I'm around. And recently, within the last year and a half or so, I've had an increase in the number of people who come up and say, "Oh, my son is with you." And time was back when it would be, "Oh, my son is working as a corrections officer, or he's a reserve deputy sheriff," something like that. But I'm finding now that a lot of these parents are coming up and saying hello and indicating to me that their child is an inmate with us.
Yeah.
And when I go to, say, sorry about that, they say, "No, don't be, because I know that he's safe."
Right.
And, I want them to have other options, for them to know that their child is safe, not just being in a correctional setting, but in a treatment setting.
And we got about a little less than a third of the show left. We've really talked up the show. I want to give you a couple of moments to talk a little bit about what you do down at the jail, because you deal with people who have substance problems, and I believe that you have one of the first substance abuse programs that we saw in the Commonwealth, right?
Correct. Yeah, we've got a tremendously dedicated program staff down at the jail, and I'll say to your viewers, anybody is certainly welcome to come down and tour the correctional facility that has an interest. We entertain groups if they want to come down and see and look around. But our corrections staff is phenomenal down there. They're very proud of what they do. But the program staff that you touched upon, the RSAT, the Residential Substance Abuse Treatment Units, we've got. I gave you a.
I'm kind of perusing it right now
I
as we
apologize
speak.
for dropping that on you as we came through the door.
It's okay.
But
a quick study.
This is some of the great stuff that we have going on. We've got a lot of these drug treatment programs, which the inmates are encouraged to avail themselves of. It's nothing that we can really force people to do, but we find that you can, through certain incentives within the jail, good time, things like that, you can get the inmates, and a lot of them really are motivated because many of them get that epiphany when they're in jail, saying, this is as low as I think I want to go. So you get them involved in a lot of these treatment programs, a lot of these group programs that we've got. You've got them, once we get them clean and sober, once they detox, and we do an awful lot of that as well.
Find a way to re-enter them back into society.
Right, that's the idea. So while they're there, they're going to be working on constructive things. So we've got a myriad of educational programs. They can get GEDs while they're there. They can get vocational skills while they're there. They can work on the county farm while they're there. And if they're lucky, they'll be able to go and join our community work groups and come out into our communities and actually do work in the towns. And they really like that. And I like to tell people that I call that a tangible installment on, everyone says their debt to society. And I think a lot of them appreciate the fact that they themselves feel like they're giving back to the community that they hurt and took from. And I think that can be cathartic in a lot of ways, and your inmates really enjoy that. But we have food service programs within, because a lot of the work that's done within the jail itself, the food service, the janitorial, a lot of the maintenance work can be done by the inmates themselves. The automotive shop that we have down there, they're working on our cruisers, and it's really a tremendous outlet for them, and hopefully vocational skills. The shirt that I'm wearing,
I was going to say, there's a fashion line too.
Yes, indeed. We several years ago we had a culinary arts grant that had not been used, and the department was in danger of losing the funding. So we asked if we could switch it over to embroidery and silk screening, because we had a need for that, because we were paying outside vendors to silk screen uniforms for inmates and to embroider uniforms. We were able to get all that machinery in-house. We have instructors, vocational instructors that come in. The inmates do design. They do T-shirts, embroidery, silk screening, hats. What I'm wearing, we're doing our own uniforms, both for our staff and the inmates as well. And we do these, and the quality is very good. Now, we don't want to be competing with outside businesses, so we only do it for other government agencies and nonprofits. But it's been a tremendous success. And we've got guys that are actually out and working in the industry and doing great work.
I have to say, I remember as a little kid when I did something naughty, my mom was like, "Well, we'll send you off to jail where you'll make license plates." This is kind of the evolution of that thought that
Yes.
my mother, where at least the inmates are, as they're working on ways to re-enter society,
Yeah.
that they're learning a skill. And it's something that you were very proud to display it. Actually, you and I have had other conversations. I think you have something that's beside you as well that if you want to show that real quick right here. Yeah.
Yeah, this is
More embroidery,
more
which is pretty
embroidery
cool.
that the inmates did. This we did for the Police Chiefs Association. So the quality
cool.
is very good.
It's very good.
It's a county seal. It's it's really it's great for the inmates, and it's great for the groups that we're able to serve. And it's one of those things that I have to be conscious that every inmate that comes through the door at some point in time, I shouldn't say every, but almost every, virtually all, are going to walk out the other door. And our job, our charge, is to give them the skills that they're going to need to make it on the other side of those bars in a legitimate way. The other good news that is coming down the pike, and I think under Governor Baker, we're going to see this. I do give some credit to Governor Patrick, because he was going along with this. I think Governor Baker is going to follow it through, though, is stepping down inmates in Department of Corrections. So you have inmates who may be doing very lengthy sentences. In the last year and a half of those sentences, stepping down into county correctional facilities where they're able to avail themselves of all of our program, the myriad of programming that we offer, and benefiting the same way that the county inmates do before they re-enter our communities. And these are individuals, that could have served 15, 20 years in MCI Shirley. They're not being driven from Shirley back to Plymouth County. They're coming back to Plymouth County a year and a half and being released from Plymouth County into Plymouth County.
We have less than 2 minutes left here. If you wouldn't mind, remind folks how they can find out more information about
Sure.
Plymouth, the Plymouth County Sheriff's Department. Phone number, perhaps?
Absolutely, yeah. Our website, the Plymouth County Sheriff's Department website, is www.pcsdma.org. That's the initials for Plymouth County Sheriff's Department, ma.org. The phone number is 508-830-6200. And one last plug I'll put in here, because I know when
Please do,
minutes.
yep.
We have the county farm down on Obery Street over by the old jail. The grounds are now the Registry of Deeds and the new Plymouth Courthouse, but we have a petting zoo down there. It's actually becoming a tourist attraction. We've had strange things happen down there that you wouldn't expect to see at a correctional facility. We've had children's birthday parties at the petting zoo. We even had last year, we had a wedding party stop and do their wedding photos at the farm at a correctional facility. So that's really something that made us proud. But come and visit, please.
Absolutely. And the address again?
The address for the Sheriff's Department itself is 24 Long Pond Road in Plymouth. It's exit 5 off Route 3. If you go the other way onto Obery Street, that's where, by the courthouse and the Registry of Deeds on Obery Street, is where the Plymouth County Farm is. Thank you, Kevin.
It's all the time we have, but I thank you so much for joining us and informing us and talking to us about something that's affecting our community at this date, and at least trying to find solutions for them.
Thank you.
And that's another Crosstalk. Until next time, have a great day.
DAV stands behind America's veterans to make their transition back home easier with free services and help getting the benefits they've earned. Help us fulfill the promise to our men and women who served. Go to DAV.org to learn more.